Nigeria's economy expanded 3.46% in the last 3 months in 2023. This is good news since analysts had anticipated a lower growth rate of 2.54%. This result is primarily attributed to the oil sector, with an increase in Nigerian production of more than 12% after a slump of 3 years. However, the country's economy continues to face major challenges. And to talk about this mixed outlook, I'm now turning to Wilson Erimabo. He is the senior economist at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Wilson Erimabo, hello, and thank you for joining me on Business Africa. So how should we look at this growth of 3.46% in the fourth quarter of 2023? And above all, will it be sustainable?
Thank you for having me. What we find is that in the fourth quarter of the year, we had, some of the best performances that we've had, over time as far as our economic growth is concerned. And if you aggregate this into full year, it means that the economy grew by 2.74. It's much lower than expected because at the beginning of the year, if you see all of the estimates for growth, most of them were around 3.2% annual growth for the year. Some were, 3.3, some were 3%. But this time we did 2.74%, which means that growth was really lower, on an annual basis. It also means that by the time you compute national GDP in dollars, and with all of the exchange rate reforms that we've seen in Nigeria, so GDP in dollars should be less than $400 billion, which, is quite low, and then it means lower per capita income. Nigeria used to grow at 7%, 6%, some decades ago. And so we are hoping that we can start moving towards that direction as far as the economy is concerned.
Meanwhile, Nigerians have faced the end of fuel subsidies and are still suffering from a runaway inflation. How do you think households can cope with this hardship?
So what we've seen is that inflation, as at the last figure, is currently at 29.9%, which is really one of the highest since, decades ago, even more than 2 decades ago. Same with food inflation. Food inflation is over 30%, right? The currency has depreciated significantly over the last months. If you look at unemployment figures, they're also high. So what all of this mean, is that Nigerians are, really going through hardship. Per capita income has been severely affected, and it's really low as well. And income of citizens, is not rising as much as people anticipate because there's a lot of, businesses are facing so much cost from the subsidy and foreign exchange reforms. And so it is not in any way sustainable for us to have this kind of, hardship because, again, the people, if you go through the streets, people are, still expecting the government to be able to provide some level of support, whether it's financial support for them, especially since the subsidies have been removed on fuel. Since the subsidy was removed, so what we have is a case where government revenues have also increased. So people are expectant of their state and federal government to provide, whether it's cash support or other incentives for them to be able to, feed and do business normally.
President Bola Tinubu has implemented a raft of reforms to attract investors, but overall, do you think his policies are getting significant results?
Well, part of why some of these reforms were put in the first place was to free up government resources and to ensure that when government resources are freed up, it can then be channeled into key areas of the economy. So, for instance, Nigeria was spending close to 3 trillion or even more than that on fuel subsidies, before the government came in. And so part of the issue is to remove subsidies so that government can have enough, revenue to be able to provide roads and infrastructure and other social needs. But the question then is, we're not seeing that all of these happen as much as we expect. We understand that this is just a few months into, just some few months into the new administration. But again, I think they need to move at a faster pace. A 28 trillion naira budget is something that, if well implemented, should be able to support the economy. So I'm talking here about either providing some support for businesses, particularly those small businesses. It could be things like tax incentives. It could be providing infrastructure, providing ease of doing business, reforms that will ensure that businesses can grow and survive the harsh environment. So those are some of the key expectations that people and businesses have of the government and from the government. And we hope that some of those, or a lot of those expectations, will be met.
Wilson Eremebo, thank you very much.